How a game of good cop, bad cop sealed the EU-Ukraine fund deal. Top European leaders coordinated to get the Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, to agree to the €50 billion plan aimed at keeping Ukraine's economy afloat during the war with Russia. Prime Minister Viktor Orban of Hungary, second from right, during meetings in Brussels on Thursday. Some European leaders jested they'd send Prime Minister Viktor Orban of Hungary their hotel bills for the extra nights they had to spend in Brussels to convince him to support funding for Ukraine. Others, less jokingly, relayed to him he was facing the risk of a legal suspension from EU proceedings. And a few offered a friendly, sympathetic ear over late-night drinks as he complained about what he sees as a European bureaucracy stacked against him out of ideological animus. By Thursday morning, just 1 hour into an emergency European Union summit meeting, this carefully coordinated, behind-the-scenes pressure had forced Mr. Orban to fold. After weeks of standing in the way as the only holdout among 27 leaders, he finally agreed to a landmark fund for Ukraine worth €50 billion, or $54 billion. The breakthrough was especially significant for both Ukraine and the European Union. It will help keep Ukraine's economy afloat for the next 4 years, even as U.S. aid is stuck in Congress. And it demonstrated European resolve to stand united in support of Ukraine against Russia, and its determination to bring an often obstructionist Mr. Orban to heel. To get there, Europe's most important leaders each assumed varied roles to push Mr. Orban into line. European Council President Charles Michel played the bad cop. On Monday, he called Mr. Orban to let him know there was no way he would be granted his demand for an annual veto right over the Ukraine fund. And he put the EU's nuclear option on the table, telling Mr. Orban that some member states were considering launching a procedure that would strip him of his vote entirely in what would be an unprecedented use of the EU's rulebook. Then, on Wednesday evening, Mr. Orban met with Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni of Italy, his ideological friend from the hard right, in the executive suite of the stately, five-star Hotel Amigo, a staple for visiting dignitaries. Tucked away in the heart of Brussels. Sitting on green velvet armchairs against the leafy wallpaper, over a bottle of champagne, Ms. Meloni told him he had more to gain from the EU if he played along. She suggested that a review of the Ukraine fund in 2025 would go some way towards satisfying his need for close scrutiny of the spending. Now was not the moment to dig in. Next, it was the turn of the French President, Emmanuel Macron, who had hosted Mr. Orban for lunch in January in Paris. He met Mr. Orban at the Amigo later on Wednesday evening and suggested that EU leaders could include some language in their joint conclusions that would nod to Mr. Orban's complaint that the EU executive branch is withholding funds from Hungary because of ideological bias. All the while, Mr. Orban knew that a few miles up the street in the European quarter of Brussels, other leaders were meeting to talk about him, without him. A meeting between Mr. Michel, the Dutch Prime Minister, Mark Rutte, and the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, confirmed that there was nothing to gain from holding out on the Ukraine fund. They stood committed that no further concession, like the unfreezing of EU money for Budapest, which Mr. Orban had squeezed from his partners before, would be forthcoming. That word was relayed back to Mr. Orban. The extraordinary efforts to get Mr. Orban to capitulate reflected both the Hungarian leader's unique power to play the role of spoiler, as well as the determination of his EU partners to secure unanimous agreement to help Ukraine. Ukraine desperately needs to keep basic services running. The European aid, to be dispensed in the form of loans and grants over the next 4 years, would both cover immediate needs and allow Ukraine to plan its long-term budget.